Hey there, Mountaineers. I'm Matterhorn Matt, and this is episode 2 of Matterhorn Mondays, the weekly podcast where I have a guest and we talk about all things Disney. This week, my guest is Rob Plays. Say hi, Rob.
Hey, everybody.
And he has his own YouTube channel, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel, Rob?
Sure. So my channel is Rob Plays. It used to be a video game channel, but now it's a purely Disney channel where every week I put up 2 videos, one of them being about the history of the parks or the company or the people behind the company. And then the other video is usually some sort of op-ed piece about what I think about recent news about the company and the parks or where I would love to see the company going. And then occasionally when I make it down there, I do some Disney vlogs as well.
Yeah, man, he has a really great channel. I would definitely recommend go checking it out. Hey Mountaineers, it's Matt from the future, and I just wanted to apologize for a lot of the audio issues in this episode. My internet kept partially giving out during the whole talk, and I tried to clean it up as much as I could, but this was the best I could do. Sorry, guys. And today's topics are theming in Walt Disney World's park, Marvel Land, and the possibility of a 5th park. So let's get started with the first topic. Let's see, the thing Disney is probably known most for with their parks is interweaving all of the attractions with a certain storyline in each of the lands. And I feel like when they redid Tomorrowland in Walt Disney World, the theme that they created for Tomorrowland was fantastic. The alien city, all that stuff. But now I feel like they've sort of moved away from all of that stuff, and with them replacing a lot of attractions in Tomorrowland, which pretty much destroys the theming of Tomorrowland. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I always call it the Magic Kingdom's junk drawer. Whenever they have like an IP or an attraction where they just can't find a good spot for it, it just seems to end up in Tomorrowland. But as you I really liked what they took to Tomorrowland, because it couldn't have been the Tomorrowland of the original Magic Kingdom. It had that same flaw that Disneyland ran into. It has the same flaw that I think Future World's kind of running into. And so this idea of more of a fictional sci-fi world really worked out. And then they just started to work in just anything remotely science fiction-esque, even stuff that wasn't fully sci-fi, like, Toy Story. Kinda it really rides that fine line, and then it just they eventually went off on this deep end, and we have things like the Incredibles dance party, which doesn't really feel like anything related to Tomorrowland. I really hope they do something with the place, because it does seem like a sort of hodgepodge of just different ideas out there.
And with the recent announcing of the Tron coaster from Shanghai coming to Tomorrowland, I feel like that's just giving another big blow to Tomorrowland. Unless they do something, I'm not sure if they can, but unless they do something to weave it into the old storyline and try to bring back Tomorrowland, but I'm not sure how they can fit Tron into the theme of a futuristic spaceport.
Right? I mean, it's such a double-edged blade when they announced that, because on one hand, I'm a big fan of Tron, and I would love to see new things in Tomorrowland, so I was super excited when they announced that. But on the other hand, like you said, it doesn't really, and to be fair, they can't, I don't think any one ride is going to just be that reboot that fixes Tomorrowland. They'd have to do this overhaul, and my prediction has always been, or maybe not prediction, but my theory has always been that they were planning to redo all of Tomorrowland to base it on the film George Clooney, and then what happened is that film just didn't do as well, and we're not seeing a sequel to it, and I think that's where all their plans went out the window, and now they don't know what to do with it, and we're getting Tron. So the best thing I would hope for is that if they did redo Tomorrowland, they worked in an element where they still have the tech that puts people on the grid, and so there becomes a reasoning to have that Tron coaster in the back there. But it doesn't, like you said, it just doesn't seem like they're moving towards this direction of we have an idea for this land. It just seems like they're continuing to throw in some, attractions.
Yeah, and I actually rewatched Tomorrowland a couple months ago, and it wasn't as good as I remembered. I remember when I walked out of the theater, I told my dad the ending felt like a huge, I guess, PSA, and I felt the same way watching it the second time, and I feel like there was just so much potential for that movie to be super good. And I don't know, it just makes me sad.
Yeah, it was good for what it was, I thought. Like, I thought it was an okay... I thought it was a good... I think it was targeted towards kids, and on that front, it worked really well. I think that's where a heavy-handed ending like that works. And the problem was, they, like, sold it as, you know, this mysterious... from the writers of Lost, like, what is Tomorrowland, this mystery? And the answer to that mystery was, it's kind of just like a fun kids movie, and that's how it should have been marketed. But yeah, I think that world was amazing, and that's what I wanted to see Tomorrowland become to an extent, and I wanted to see them flesh out that world. And you saw them, they like released a book, I think, in tandem with the film, so it felt like they were trying to do that, but it just didn't work fully. And so maybe they just have to take it back to the drawing boards.
Yeah, and I mean, Brad Bird is a really good director. He directed one of my favorite Disney Pixar movies, in The Incredibles, and yeah, it's just really sad to see the movie tank the way it did. And like you said, the way they marketed it as a mysterious Tomorrowland, but then when they only spent, I guess, a small chunk of the movie actually in Tomorrowland and the rest on Earth following the girl, I forget her name, but yeah, it just was probably doomed from the start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that created the problem they have now, which is, if you think about their science fiction library, what you've got is Star Wars now, which makes up the bulk of it. I guess you could kind of argue like Marvel has some, like, a lot of sci-fi elements, maybe Guardians of the Galaxy specifically, Tomorrowland, and then Tron. And like none of them besides Star Wars, which is getting its own land already, I think is strong enough to carry a whole part of the park. So I think what they would need to do to fix Tomorrowland is something that I don't think that they'll ever do with Iger as CEO, which is develop something completely original that's not based on an IP and just sort of create its own standalone Tomorrowland with its own backstory. Kind of go back to the 90s style of Imagineering, where it's there and it's coming from nothing but the imagination of these Imagineers.
Yeah. And this segues us into the second half of this topic, which is Guardians of the Galaxy in EPCOT. Now, with the construction of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge in the Hollywood studios, it's interesting that they didn't just put it in a whole separate park and connected it inside of Hollywood studios. And with Guardians of the Galaxy in EPCOT, that's making me think that they're really not going for the whole Marvel land like they're trying to do for Disneyland, because if they have a Marvel-themed attraction in EPCOT, it would seem, I guess, out of place if they eventually down the road created a whole land dedicated to Marvel movies.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, they could totally be saving that card up their sleeve for if they ever work out that deal with Universal and they want to put something in there. I find it interesting that the way they're doing this. Like, I get what they're doing with Hollywood studios, because they've sort of shifted away from the whole movie making element of the park like years and years ago. And so it seems like now they just have enough of properties lined up that they can actually make that shift that they want to make. And they're kind of doing the same thing on the West Coast, right? With California Adventure, where it seems like there's less of a focus on California. And it seems like they're turning them, like they're bringing them both to this middle ground where they're going to be equivalent parks to one another. Whereas like EPCOT, this is interesting. And I don't know how true this is, because I had seen it from like a Twitter account from somebody who works at the parks, and I don't know how reliable they are, but they had mentioned that there was no plan to change the building name for Guardians of the Galaxy from the Universe of Energy, which would be very interesting, because I think a common argument made, is that Guardians of the Galaxy has no place in Future World. It's not it's like a sci-fi, like what's it doing there when it's supposed to be about our future. But the argument I've always made was like, well, what if they just tie the ride into energy somehow, so you're still learning about energy just through the Guardians of the Galaxy, and maybe with this that would be a possibility. And then that kind of makes it its own standalone thing, where like it just wouldn't be part of a Marvel land, but that becomes such a bigger can of worms, because who knows when they'll ever be able to do other Marvel stuff in the parks anyway.
And you saying that makes me think that maybe eventually down the road, when they do get to the Marvel land, they'll maybe move Guardians out of the Energy Pavilion and replace it with something else energy related. I don't know. That's just me thinking right off the top of my head, but
yeah, I mean, it's funny because you say that, and I think that brings about this larger topic that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, but it was something that I started to think about when the Guardians were announced for Disneyland with the Tower of Terror, which is, people talk about the lasting power of these IPs and like, will Guardians be enough a classic that in 20 or 30 years people are still going to want to ride that ride? But maybe the answer to that is, do these rides need to exist for 20 or 30 years? Like, the old style was you'd have pirates and it's, still around decades later, but maybe we're getting to this point in theme park history where, the shelf life of an attraction is maybe 10 or 15 years and then it just gets reskinned into something else. So, that would open up a whole world of opportunities of what they can do with these things.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking that when they announced Guardians to replace Tower of Terror. I was thinking that eventually down the road they'd switch it back, I don't know, possibly to Tower of Terror, but I don't know, I just don't like the way that feels, just replacing an old ride, arguably a classic ride, for something that's more current and then just slapping the original theme back onto it.
It's a delicate line to walk, I imagine, for them, because obviously you see whenever these things are announced, you get so much just lashback from the community who's angry about these changes. But at the same time, you look at the lines for some of these new attractions, and clearly there's a demand for them. Yeah. And it's funny because I try not to think often about, like, what would Walt think or what would Walt do. I think that we live in a very different world, so it's hard to tell that. But, like, considering how open and dedicated he was to upgrading and changing attractions, part of me would like to think he'd love the idea of an attraction where you could just on a whim reskin it to something else. I don't know if he'd be the type of person who would do it very often, but the ability there, I think in itself would just be like, it'd be a creative help more than anything else, that you could do something totally different. I mean, who knows what they'll do with it. I love the idea of Disney buying the Twilight Zone, and so that they could own it and keep it without having to pay, and then maybe reboot it in some respect. But, I don't know if they're going to do that, but that would be really cool.
Yeah, and what you said calls back to what I said last week about people saying, what would Walt do? And the sad truth is that Walt, he's just not around anymore to make these decisions, and it's not up to him, or it's not up to the fans that say what would Walt do. It's up to what makes money. And in the end, Guardians is more relevant than the Tower of Terror. It's more, I guess it's what the fans would want to see,
Yeah, and I think also, well, to one extent of that, what would Walt do? I guess the real answer is he probably wouldn't care, because he seemed to always have been the person who moved on to the next thing. And even by the time, like, when he passed, he was focused on EPCOT. Like, I remember reading in one of the history books that, like, he actually got upset because people were asking him about the Magic Kingdom in Disney World, like what they were going to do with it. And he was just like, you guys know this stuff already. Like, we know theme parks. Like, EPCOT's the focus. So he probably would be like, why are you doing more theme park stuff? We've got bigger fish to fry. On topic of Guardians, it's funny. The big argument I see is that it's not enough of a classic to justify a ride, but I feel like a good counter argument to that is making rides on these properties is how you turn them into a classic. If you go back into the history, I guess to go back to Walt again, he was putting out attractions based on his animated films just years after they had come out. Peter Pan was not a classic when they opened Peter Pan's Flight. That was just a couple of years old. Same thing with Alice in Wonderland. Look at Sleeping Beauty Castle in Disneyland. That was built years before the movie even came out. So, I think there's a good use for Imagineering to just, like, not ask that question of, like, is it a classic or is it worth being put there, or will people love the property and just go, like, this is a good idea, let's just put that there. Although realistically, I'm sure it's also half and half with executives saying we need to push this property and that property to sell some more merch and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And back in the 50s, when Walt put those IP-based rides of Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland and all those, he didn't know that they were going to be classics, like you said. And I don't think he really cared. He just wanted to see his works. He wanted people to be able to experience them in, I guess, real life. And it worked out so far back then, but now it's a whole different story.
And for all we know, for some people, Peter Pan's a classic because they have those memories of riding the ride in tandem with seeing the movie. Like, that sort of stuff, I think, helps with it. I think for us who are older, you see that disconnect more. But there's probably a generation of young kids out there who are going to ride Mission Breakout, and they're going to remember watching Guardians of the Galaxy. And that together is going to help build it up into a franchise that, like, sticks with them over the long term. So, I think it's I'm going to Disneyland for the second time in November. First time I'll be able to ride it. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I rode it a couple months ago, and I think personally it's better than Tower of Terror because there's more drops and whatever, but I just miss Tower of Terror.
It looks like fun. It looks like so much fun. I was actually a little jealous that Florida wasn't getting it, while most East Coast people were like relieved that the original tower is staying in Florida. I was like, I kind of want it. Like, it'd be fun.
Yeah, and who knows what the new Guardians attraction will be like, because I don't think they've announced what the ride is actually going to be like. They've just announced that it's going to be in Future World. And let's see, that brings us over to the second half of this topic, which is the theming in EPCOT. And over the years, they've slowly moved past what EPCOT once was, with educational rides, teaching about a hopeful future and all that stuff. And personally, I'm sad to see it go. I never got to experience it back in the day, back when it was in its prime. But what are your thoughts on that?
It's bittersweet. It's a bittersweet change. Like, I was lucky enough. I was young when it was, the 80s and early 90s. And so I did get to experience things like World of Motion and Horizons. And I love those attractions. And so I have a lot of fond memories of them and think they were great. But at the same time, I actually have pretty controversial, I feel like, views on EPCOT. I've made videos on this in the past that are not always well received because I am okay with it changing. Like, my stance has always been that EPCOT as a theme park was already a compromise on what it was supposed to be, which was a city. Mm-hmm. So if we're starting day one with this compromise, it just doesn't feel as powerful to me to then change the theme again. Like, you've already done it. You started day one not being the thing that Walt wanted it to be or set it out for it to be. So, like, we've already accepted that change is acceptable. And, I make an argument in one of my videos about how the IP, people call it EPCOT because they just want to throw all these IPs on it. But I don't think that can necessarily destroy the theme of the EPCOT. Even if you stick to the idea of it just being like an educational theme park, it just closed, but Ellen's Energy Adventure taught us about energy, and it used it with Ellen and Bill Nye. Bill has some, connection with science, but Ellen has that. She's a comedian. There was like nothing remotely science related there, yet it still worked. And, I think there's plenty of opportunity to continue to do that. Finding Nemo and, the seas, you can still go in there and learn about animals in the ocean and ocean life. And even though it is tied to like a entertainment cartoon. So I think it's a different approach. Yeah, I think you look at something like a World of Ocean or Horizons, you wish for that sort of stuff to come back. But I think it's just a changing of an era. Like, that's kind of on its way out, or it's been on its way out since Iger stepped in. And who knows, maybe it'll come back if with whoever takes over they want to do more original stuff. But as of now, it just seems like the idea is let's use the property that they own, but try and keep that theme. And who knows, like, until we get details on Guardians, I'm not about to write off the theme of Future World as dead yet until we see. It could, for all we know, be a roller coaster and then that's it. But maybe there's still that educational value there.
Yeah, I feel like deep down they want to keep the educational content, at least to some extent, because with Guardians of the Galaxy, like you said, they could really do something interesting in terms of teaching kids about how energy works. And I mean, I was in EPCOT a few years ago, and personally, it wasn't, how do I put this? It wasn't my favorite park out of all four of them. We only spent not even a half day in Future World. We spent all of our time in the World Showcase, and I think that is really what puts all this, why Bob Iger is doing all of this stuff, because Future World right now is just not very good, I guess. Innoventions is, I don't want to say dead. It's
awful. It is. I think it's totally, and that's a shame, because I think that's where the opportunity lies to take the spirit of Future World and keep it alive. Like, one of the other half of that argument for EPCOT is, it's a different world we live in now. People learn different ways. Look at YouTube alone. You go on and you watch some of these YouTube channels that teach you about science and all this other stuff. Kids are growing up learning in a whole different manner than from the 80s, and we can't just ignore that and pretend things are like the good old days. So, like, they need to change that, and I think Innoventions would have been a great opportunity, and maybe it still is. I mean, I don't know what their plans are with it, but if to turn that into almost like a perpetual World's Fair for technology that is just constantly changing, and keep the concept of Future World alive in that building, so that all these bigger pavilions can become more entertainment attractions, and then you kind of get the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, a lot of people are really banging on the concept art that was released for the Future World revamp, when I forget when that's happening, but and they're saying that Innoventions is going to be demolished, but not a lot of people are saying that it's just concept art. It's not set in stone. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. It's their blue sky concept, they call it.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, they could throw us a curveball and keep Innoventions and do like you said, but when I was a kid, I always hated mixing education with some form of, I don't know, like I don't want to say entertainment, but
yeah. Well, you got to do it the right way. I think that's the key. I think you can't. It takes a lot of work to do it. That's why you see it's not as common as it unfortunately should be. But like, how do you make people learn while having fun in a way that they don't realize they're learning? And off the top of my head, I can't think of a lot of great examples. I personally watch a lot of YouTube channels that are based on like Vsauce, just those. Oh, those somehow they create entertaining stuff. Or another one, Mythbusters. I mean, how many people will watch Mythbusters for like this crazy myth, but in the process maybe learn a little something about just physics and how. Yeah. I think Disney needs to focus on how to do that in a way that is geared toward modern audiences, because I think the old school of, Horizons with the slow animatronic, scenes, just sort of those what ifs, I love them for the memories, but I don't think they teach people. I think that if Horizons was still around today, it'd be considered a 20-minute nap ride the same way Ellen was when it closed.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like you said, kids these days are way different than how they were back in the 70s. Almost every kid has an iPhone or an iPad in their hands watching YouTube videos, and I'm sure a lot of parents would like to put on, entertaining educational videos for their kids so they can learn and have fun at the same time. But then again, doing that, I feel like making that kind of content is really hard, and Disney would have to put on their thinking caps for this one.
But they're good. I mean, like, that's where I'm also hopeful, because they're Imagineering super talented, and I think if anybody can do it, it's Disney. It's funny, all this talk, and I just had this random idea because I'm looking at the concept art right now, and I'm thinking of Mission Space, and I'm also thinking about the fact that I played for a long time this computer game called Kerbal Space Program, which is like a game where you build rocket ships, you launch them into space. And it is a really difficult game because it tries to mimic the physics of space travel as much as possible. And so, like, while I'm not like, it wasn't the equivalent of taking a class in school, I did learn the basics of like orbital mechanics and how, spaceships get into space and stay in orbit. And I did that while having fun playing a game. And so if it's possible there, I think it's totally possible in a place like Epcot.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I totally forgot about that game, Kerbal Space Program. Man, that was a great game. But yeah, like you said, I agree with everything you just said. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to our third topic, which is the possibility of a fifth park in Walt Disney World. And like I said earlier about Star Wars Land going in Hollywood Studios and not its own land, I just don't think, I personally don't see Disney making a fifth gate anytime soon. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny. I thought we were going to go to this conversation with me having to be like the standout opinion on it, but it sounds like we're on the same page, because I was about to say, like, I don't think we'll ever see a fifth gate. Now, maybe it's for different reasons, but I think I'm putting a lot of faith into the Star Wars Hotel. I personally believe that if it is what Disney promises it to be, that is going to be the next evolution of theme park entertainment, and I think we'll never see theme parks. We'll never see new theme parks again. We'll see that. We'll see these immersive, like 3 or 4 day long adventures that blend hotels with attractions, with interactive stuff. I think that's going to be the big thing. So if the Star Wars hotel picks up, I think we'll never see a fifth gate. I think what we'll see instead is whatever the next hotel, Pirates of the Caribbean Hotel or Tron Hotel, or whatever property they want to push next. I think that's where they'll go with it, because one, I think it will stand out, right? Like, you know, Disney is the king of theme parks, I believe, but they've still got competition with Universal. Universal isn't doing anything like this yet, although I'm sure they're throwing together plans for a Hogwarts sometime soon, because that's like a no-brainer. And I think it'll help make them more money, just because while it is a shorter experience and a more premium experience, the result is they get to charge more for it, to look at it on the business end. But I also just think that's the further evolution of what these parks set out to do, which is to immerse you in another world. Now it's just putting you in very specific worlds, but in a total sense over the course of a couple of days. So I think that's where they'll go with it. At least I hope.
Yeah, totally, man. That I'm gonna have to sell an arm and a leg to get it to be able to stay a night at that Star Wars hotel. But Disney World, when it comes to Disney World and the fifth gate, it's really different than the situation over here in California, because Disney World has way more space for fifth gate, maybe even the sixth gate if they really really wanted to. But
space-wise, if they wanted to, 6, 7, 8, they could do so many more theme parks. It's insane how much space they have over there.
Yeah, and in California, they just really don't have that option unless Disney ends up buying up every single hotel and restaurant along Harbor and Catella. But over in Disney World, it's a whole different story, like I said. And I don't know, I feel like I'd rather have complete stories. Like, I'd rather have a fixed Tomorrowland than a fifth gate, personally.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. I'm in full agreement. Like, part of the reason before the Star Wars Hotel announcement, part of the reason I still didn't think there was going to be a fifth gate, which is there's just so much work left to be done on all these other parks. They're all living and breathing. DCA can use, its upgrades, and it looks like maybe we'll see with a Marvel Land, and, Epcot obviously needs its upgrades. And, by the time they get through the whole list of everything to be touched up and fixed up, something, is going to be at the top of the list again that inevitably needs it, which is maybe Tomorrowland at the end of that list. And, I think 4 is, I don't know, personally for me, it seems like enough, but that could just be the bias of that's all we have. So I've just learned to make that be enough. But yeah, I can't even, people always talk about what would that fifth gate be themed on? And I don't know what's left. I feel like whenever I think of a perfect theme, I think that would be great for a hotel experience, not so much just a theme park.
Mm-hmm. And I'd rather, like you said, I'd rather have Disney focus all of their energy on fixing up everything on both coasts, than creating a third gate for Disneyland or a fifth gate for Walt Disney World. But they're adding all these new lands to Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge to Hollywood Studios, which is different than a fifth gate, but I feel like they're banking on a lot of people on those new lands, drawing in a lot of people to those areas of the park, which will give them more time to do the little touch-ups, like you said, in Magic Kingdom and in all the other places. And I don't think I've seen anybody else say this, but I feel like the reason they put Tron right next to Space Mountain is so when Tron opens, it'll be able to draw all the crowds and they can just close down Space Mountain for a couple years and do a complete refurb like they did in Disneyland.
I 100% agree with you. I was so confused when the Tron announcement was made, because I similarly was like, why do you put a brand new shiny sci-fi roller coaster next to like this sci-fi roller coaster that's just going to make the old one look bad? To people like us who love the parks, obviously Space Mountain will always be a classic, will always have a place for it in our hearts. But like for your average guest where Disney is just a place to visit, like they're gonna go, well, why would I want to go on this old one when this new fast one's there and it's cool? And I think that's what it is. I think it's what you said. This will give them the opportunity to maybe not replace it. Somebody's pointed out that the building's just so iconic that I think you wouldn't be able to get rid of it. And so I think that's true, but I think they can gut it and put something else inside, whether it's another roller coaster or just a completely different experience in there. And personally, I'm all for that. I think that's a cool idea and a cool way to go about doing it. Give people something bigger and better in the meantime, and then use that to build up something new. But I guess we'll see. Obviously, that sort of thing they're not going to announce until they've got like some solid plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to sound mean, but the Space Mountain in Magic Kingdom isn't as good as the one in Disneyland, because I guess I'm probably biased because I've been to Disneyland way more times than Walt Disney World, but I just feel like it's smoother. The onboard audio really adds to the experience, and I don't know.
So my friend Christine and we did a video comparing and contrasting both Space Mountains, and it is a very divisive topic, let me tell you. I feel like with certain rides like Tower of Terror, people be like, yeah, well, the Florida one is actually better, and yeah, but it's still good. Space Mountain, I see arguments on both sides. I'm in the camp of I like the Disney World version because it's not smoother, but that's also why I love the Matterhorn, and I see people talk about how bumpy and rough the Matterhorn is. And I'm like, yeah, I love it. That's the whole point. I love things like that. But I will give you this. The music in Space Mountain in Disneyland makes that ride a totally different experience. And I really wish they did something like that in Disney World to a better degree. But then, I feel like the trade-off's also like Space Mountain and Disney World has a really cool queue versus Disneyland's. And it's a give and take. You work with the space you got. And I think it's a testament to both rides that people can go back and forth over them without it being a clear choice.
And oh man, what you said about the Matterhorn, I'm not a fan of how rough the Matterhorn is. When I ride that ride, my back hurts, and I'm for perspective, I'm 6'1" and I can barely fit into the tiny seats in the Matterhorn. It's just a terrible time for me.
Everyone who I've ridden it with, they're just like, they were like, one and done. I've done it for the history of it. I don't need to go on again. I was like, I'm ready to just go around a second time. I don't know why. I really do love that ride. I wish they'd bring a version of, I guess we have Expedition Everest, kind of like that.
No, it's not the same as the Matterhorn.
Yeah. It's the history there. That's why I think I love it so much. It got so much history behind it.
Absolutely. And I mean, even though I don't like the experience, I appreciate the Matterhorn for what it is. I mean, Walt built that, and you can't say the same for Expedition Everest or I guess basically anything in the Magic Kingdom, but yeah.
Yeah, pretty much all we got is Carousel of Progress, and even that's been changed so much it's hard to say.
Carousel of Progress is still one of my favorites, but I wish they'd move it over to California, but that's a whole different story.
I get a lot of flack because my hope is that they change it completely, and people are not happy with the thought of that. But I would love to see all 4 scenes replaced with new scenes that are still based in the past, but different eras in the past. I think it'd be fun, but I feel like they won't do that.
Yeah, a lot of that was on my mind earlier because I was thinking how many fans would backlash at the thought of replacing all the old animatronics in Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland and updating them to the new, smoother animatronics. And I'm just wondering how many people would oppose to that like they are to them changing the whole redhead scene.
I think as long as they kept the same like design of the faces and the clothes, they'd probably be okay with it because it'd just be an upgrade, which I think it gets into such murky waters. And this is something that I'd love to do in a future video, which is like it's like that old question about when you replace parts of a ship over time until every part's been replaced, is it still the same ship? And I think that same question could be applied to a ride. Like, how much do you have to change a ride on a small scale before it's not the same ride? And my argument is Carousel Progress today is not the Carousel Progress Walt made. It's not the same script anymore, not the same voice cast, not the same location, like concept's the same, and the three scenes have a lot of the animatronics from back in the day. So I feel like they're so close to completely change the thing already that they could get away with it. But I think the key to do that would be one of two ways, which is like release some really good video, historic video of the original like World's Fair version, so that people would realize like, wow, that changed so much already, and that softens the blow of changing it further. Or just do it a little bit at a time. Like, say you're updating the last scene first, and then maybe another year or two later, update the third scene, and then the second a few years, and then before you know it, it's all changed, but you were like pulling it off slowly instead of ripping the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, totally. And I, for one, would be okay if they did what you said, and if they replaced all the animatronics in Pirates, or say in a different classic Disney ride like Haunted Mansion. I would be totally 100% okay if they replaced them with the newer age animatronics, and I agree with everything you just said. I
think what would make it a lot better for people also is if they somehow gave people a way to commemorate the ride as it was, as they remembered it. And that's something I'm surprised they haven't done yet. Like, why can't Ellen's Energy Adventure just closed. And maybe it's a rights thing and it's a legal thing, but like, why wasn't I able to buy a Disney Blu-ray that is a full, 4K ride through of that attraction with like a behind the scenes documentary or like interviews with Bill Nye and Ellen, and like something where I'm like, all right, I have this now, so that when I'm feeling nostalgic, I could relive this experience, and that will totally just soften the blow of having something new put there. And I think if they did that, one, they'd be making money off of a new product, and how many theme parks can say they can profit off of closing a ride? And then two, they'd probably get better feedback from fans, when it comes to making these changes.
Yeah, I'd totally be down with buying a Blu-ray copy of, say, Pirates of the Caribbean, of how it was. Well, I guess not a Blu-ray copy, but as high as a definition as they can get as how it was when they originally opened it. And I could really see Disney doing that, maybe in the future. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the third half of this topic, which is, I don't know if you've heard, well, you probably have, but the rumored Indiana Jones land in Animal Kingdom. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. I love the idea. Here's the thing. I'd love any idea they threw out for Dinoland USA, because I really don't like Dinoland USA. I don't like it on face value. I love Dinosaur the Ride. Let me get that out of the way, because I feel like that's sort of standalone to the rest of the park. But I just don't like how it's the laziest I've ever seen Imagineering act. And people talk about how there's a backstory to the land, and there is a backstory, but the backstory was retrofitted to the fact that they needed to throw a bunch of cheap attractions in there because economically things weren't going great, and the park needed some extra stuff. And so I love the idea that they eventually, now that Pandora is finally open, they can finally do things like repair the Yeti in Everest and do something with Dinoland. Indiana Jones, I think, is a great fit. I'd hope there'd still be some sort of dinosaur attraction, but I know part of this rumor involves converting Dinosaur into an Indiana Jones ride, so maybe that wouldn't be the case. I also don't know how you would actually put dinosaurs in Indiana Jones, so I guess that doesn't make much sense. But I think it'd be fun. He's a classic character. People love him. You know, we've got more movies coming. Hopefully, you know, I'm very progressive with this stuff in that I don't think things are too sacred to change. So, like, I hope this movie they pass the hat on to a new Indiana, whether it's a young Indiana Jones or just somebody who takes his mantle. Maybe not Shia LaBeouf, but somebody, and continue the franchise. And so, you know, I think there are legs there for a land. They just have to do it. And hopefully we'll see that announcement, I guess, after, you know, they make more progress on EPCOT and Star Wars Land and all that stuff.
Yeah, and this just popped into my head. With the last Indiana Jones being, I guess, more sci-fi than the previous ones with aliens, I'm thinking maybe, this is a big stretch, but maybe the newest Indiana Jones will have something to do with dinosaurs. I don't know, and they'll figure out a way to integrate the newest movie into Dinoland. And I agree with what you said about it being cheap. I feel like Dinoland is the California Adventure Paradise Pier of Animal Kingdom.
Yes, that's a great comparison. Specifically the side part of the pier. It's been years since I've been there, but I feel like the Pixar part with the California Scream, and I like that area a lot. But on the other side, when it was just like the swings and stuff, I was very confused that was there. But it is what it is. Yeah,
Goofy's Sky School is not the best attraction.
No, it's definitely them trying to, I don't know, get. I think it's a numbers game. Get more attractions for less cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to what I said about Indiana Jones. I know it's probably a stretch, but that's just the thought I'm having just now that just popped into my head right now. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's like walking on eggshells, like how they take Indiana Jones. Because I think Spielberg's involved with the new movie. I think I've read as much. So it's different. Like when Star Wars left Lucas's hands and went into Disney, they were like, listen, we got to do things differently. We've got to go back to what made the franchise great, and that worked well. And so on one hand, I almost want to see Indiana Jones do a similar thing. Not necessarily where they're going back to fighting Nazis in World War II, but like going back to, I think there was a disconnect because, like you said, the last one was sci-fi because it was the Crystal Skull, the alien. And from a film perspective, that's not much crazier than the idea of like the Ark of the Covenant melting Nazi faces. Like they're both supernatural at this point or beyond our world. And so dinosaurs, I don't think would be any different in that regard, but I'm wondering if it would just not feel the same. Like I'm wondering if they have to go back to sort of like a old school, like looking for a relic that has magic properties or something or other. But if it becomes a franchise, like you got room to play with it and do different things. And so who knows? I do think though, if they were to redo the ride for like an Indian land, I think they'd scrap the dinosaurs completely. Maybe that's just me thinking optimistically, but I think if they're going to commit to redoing an area like that, they're just going to do it completely, not just like an Ellen. We're going to throw an Ellen and the animatronic to this dinosaur ride, like same thing, like just throwing an Indiana Jones animatronic in there and calling it a day. I hope they do more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with what you said. Indiana Jones is very different when it comes to Star Wars. I feel like there's a lot more Star Wars fans than Indiana Jones fans, but I'm sure a lot of people will say otherwise. But with Star Wars, Star Wars came out before Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah. It was it's funny actually. They didn't want Harrison Ford to be Indiana Jones because Lucas had worked with him on Star Wars. But or no, wait a minute. I might have it backwards. Actually, I don't know at this point. No, I'm pretty sure Indiana came after Star Wars. I might be confusing that story between American Graffiti and Star Wars. Never mind. But yeah, Indiana Jones came later.
Okay, yeah. But I feel like there's a lot more, I guess, hardcore fans of Star Wars who would like to see the new movies go back to their roots, like you said, and not the way Lucas did with the prequels. But when it comes to Indiana Jones, I feel like they have a lot more leeway than they do with Star Wars, because with Indiana Jones, you can have him pretty much anywhere searching for a mystical artifact, like you said. But with Star Wars, you have to have TIE fighters, you have to have stormtroopers, you have to have the dark side, the light side, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, that's just the way I feel.
Yeah, they could definitely. I see where you're coming from. Like, because it's less of a beloved franchise, it's still classic, but because it's, I guess, less of a hardcore fandom, you get a little more wiggle room with what you can do with it. It's not as rigid. You have less expectations. And I think because of the reception of the last one, it's one of those you can only go up from here, because it's going to be hard for it to be worse than the last one. Not to say that the worst was awful, but it just wasn't as good as the 3 before it. So, and also, like, the second one wasn't as well regarded, so I think it's also a franchise that had its ups and downs, so it's less like, they're ruining a perfect thing, they have to be careful because this is so sacred. It's like, no, this is a franchise where second movie wasn't so great, third one was better, fourth one's not so great, like, back and forth.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, and yeah, I really don't have a huge backlash, I guess, on them putting Indiana Jones into Animal Kingdom. I'd be okay if they did it properly and not, like you said, did just another Dino Land USA, like integrated Indy with.
I mean, there's got to be animals, right? That's the big thing, because it's the park's namesake. So maybe if they had a movie where it was like not a mythical creature, like a mythical animal, like I don't know, not Bigfoot maybe, but something on that level where they're just looking for this fabled creature, and that could be the sort of animal tie-in, and it'd almost be like somewhat of a callback to the Beastly Kingdom, which was supposed to be the part of the park that focused on the mythical creatures that don't really exist, like dragons and stuff. Yeah,
and I could just picture Indiana Jones punching the living crap out of a Bigfoot, and I would totally be down with that.
You and I both.
But I think that's just about going to do it for this week's podcast. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'd like to hear all your guys' thoughts on everything we discussed. If you're watching this on YouTube, down in the comments, or if you're listening on iTunes, go ahead and hop onto my YouTube channel and comment down below, and go ahead and check out Rob Plays on YouTube. He makes really great content, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you have any last things you'd like to say, Rob?
Just let us all know, what mythical creature do you want to see Indiana Jones punch in the face? That's the real question of the day.
Question of the day, yeah. Comment down below, guys. You guys can check us out both on Twitter, and we both have Patreon accounts. They'd all be linked in the description, and have a great big beautiful tomorrow. See ya.
Bye.